You don't belong in first class! Ah! I will not move. This is my seat, and I belong here. That seat is mine. I always sit there. This is the seat on my boarding pass. If you don't move now, they'll remove you. I have every right to stay in this seat.
Around them, the cabin fell silent, every breath suspended in the balance. A battle of dignity against authority unfolded in real time, and the question hung heavy in the air. When rules are twisted to mask prejudice, who will defend justice? And this is only the beginning. The next moment will shake the room even harder. Do you agree with the way she stood her ground? Write your thoughts below, and remember to like and follow for more. Danielle settled into seat 2A with the easy grace of someone who had learned to breathe through long days and longer flights. The soft hush of the first-class cabin wrapped around her like a wool coat just off a radiator. Laughter drifted from the galley, the muted clink of stemware, the faintest mist of citrus from a freshly twisted peel. A streak of Illinois autumn sun slipped across the aisle and paused on her wrist as if to bless the journey ahead. Conversations rose and fell in polite currents, a low tide of comfort that suggested nothing could go wrong. Yet beneath that calm, the air held a pressure she had felt before, the sort that warns a person the forecast might change without warning. She took out her laptop and a slim leather folio, opened the presentation she would deliver in San Francisco, and reviewed a slide about trust and the small ways systems fail ordinary people. A gate agent's farewell still warmed her ears. Have a wonderful flight, ma'am, and the thank you she had offered had been sincere. Danielle liked to meet courtesy with courtesy. When the attendant passed with a tray of champagne, Danielle declined with a smile and asked instead for sparkling water with a lemon twist, please. The glass arrived with a linen napkin folded into a careful triangle. She tipped her head in thanks, and the attendant tipped the rim of the glass toward her in a tiny salute before gliding away. Outside the oval window, a line of luggage carts rolled like a slow procession. Inside, a business traveler loosened a tie, a couple compared phone photos of grandchildren, a college kid in an oversized hoodie whispered into his earbuds about a midterm and a diner in the loop he missed already. The cabin, upholstered in tans and grays, hummed with the kind of order that says, everyone in their place, everything according to plan. Danielle adjusted her seat, slid a hand along the armrest to locate the PowerPoint, and thought about the keynote, its closing line about how dignity, once withdrawn, costs double to replace. She noticed the attendant again, now returning with that practiced, museum-quiet gait of first-class service. The woman's name tag read, Samantha. A polite smile sat precisely where a smile should sit. Danielle looked up, ready to ask for a second lemon twist. Instead, Samantha leaned in, voice low enough to sound private and public at the same time. Pardon me, ma'am, she said, the vowels polished, smooth. This particular seat is typically reserved for one of our valued regulars. Danielle's fingers rested on the keyboard. A sentence on the screen waited for its period. She let the words settle in the space between them, then turned her palms upward, open, peaceful. I understand, she said gently, but this is a seat on my boarding pass. She drew the paper from the folio in one unhurried motion and offered it. Her membership card followed, platinum gleaming like a city skyline at dusk. And I'm a regular too. Samantha's smile tightened by an imperceptible notch, like a belt crowded to the last hole. Of course, she said. Of course. The words were gracious, yet something in them kept their coats on. She examined the boarding pass, then the card, and returned them with a nod that suggested a ledger had updated but a conclusion had not. Thank you, ma'am. Across the aisle, a woman in winter white wool paused mid-gesture, a designer bag balanced in the crook of her arm. She was perhaps mid-40s, with the polished certainty of someone accustomed to being recognized by maitres. The woman glanced at Danielle, at seat 2A, then back to Samantha. Her expression made a triangle of impatience, expectation, and the kind of entitlement that rarely hears itself out loud. In the polished metal of an overhead bin, Danielle caught the reflected lift of the woman's eyebrows, the smallest semaphore of disbelief. Samantha cleared her throat with elegance. I do apologize for the inconvenience, she said, directing the phrase to Danielle while angling her body toward the woman across the aisle. The apology did the work apologies do when spoken to the wrong person. As you know, we do our best to keep regular preferences consistent. Danielle breathed in, letting the air settle behind her ribcage. She had learned, over time, that breath is a kind of anchor. Her voice, when it arrived, was steady and warm. I appreciate consistency, she said. I also appreciate seats being honored as ticketed. The woman in white stepped to the edge of the aisle, her heels touching the carpet in soundless punctuation. That's my seat, she said. Not to Danielle exactly, but not to her either. I always sit there. She let the sentence ring, as if the cabin itself would rearrange to match its tone. The business traveler paused mid-sip. A page of a magazine turned more slowly. A hush that was not silence, but a listening settled over row 2. Danielle looked at Samantha, not at the woman, because dialogue often finds its truest footing when routed through someone responsible. She lifted her boarding pass again, as though paper could be certainty's passport. Seat 2A, she said evenly, assigned to me. A small neighborly smile accompanied the words, a signal that reason had been invited to the table. Samantha's posture acquired an additional degree of official. Let me check with my supervisor, she said, as if the supervisor were a barometer and the weather needed a second opinion. She disappeared up the aisle, leaving behind a fragrant wake of hand soap and cabin coffee. The woman in white set her bag on the empty seat beside Danielle's, not touching anything, exactly, but letting the geography of possession be mapped in leather and hardware. It was a small act, and, like many small acts, a declaration. Near the bulkhead, a young passenger with a short, natural haircut glanced from Danielle to the woman, and then to the phone in her hand. Her thumb hovered over the camera app, then retreated. She looked at Danielle, met her eyes for a heartbeat, and gave the faintest shake of the head, the universal sign for do you want me to stay out of this or not. Danielle offered the softest smile, the kind that blesses witnesses for their care, then returned her gaze to the window, to the sun brightening a service truck, as if to remind everyone that light does what it will. When Samantha returned, a man walked with her, the supervisor, by his shoulder square and tie neatness. His name tag read Mark. He carried himself with the certainty of a policy manual and the patience of someone who had explained the same rule too many times. Good afternoon, ma'am, he said, placing courtesy on the table like a saucer under a cup. We're going to need you to switch to another seat to accommodate our valued passenger's usual preference. Danielle's answer came measured and kind. I'm happy to hear options, she said, as long as they honor the ticket I purchased. She gestured toward her folio without picking it up again. Seat 2A is mine. Mark's smile approached firmness. We appreciate your flexibility, he said, as if the appreciation were a down payment. But this will make things smoother for everyone. A beat passed, then another. Danielle felt the cabin noticing her, noticing the woman in white, noticing the choreography that unfolds when a system decides what story it wants to tell about who belongs where. She let the supervisor's words settle on the armrest like a dropped napkin. Neat, but out of place. I prefer to remain in my assigned seat, she said. Warmth intact, spine intact. Across the aisle, the woman's wrist flashed as she checked the time on a face that glowed like a polished coin. I have a connection, she said to no one and everyone. Why is this taking so long? The question had no question mark. Samantha's eyes slid toward the woman, then back. Mark did the same, a practice relay between power and procedure. Those glances offered a weather report more accurate than any forecast. Danielle watched without accusation, only record-keeping, the way one notes the path of a cloud about to eclipse the sun. A member of the galley crew passed with a plate of warm nuts and a refill of champagne for the couple comparing grandchildren. The man reached for a wallet and tucked a folded bill discreetly near the rim of the glass. For you, he said, soft. The attendant's thank you was equally soft. Tipping, here, was both kindness and custom. A handshake made of paper. Danielle noticed the exchange because customs matter, because values travel on small currents. She returned to her laptop to place a period at the end of the waiting sentence, then closed the lid with the gentleness one gives to things that will be needed again. She folded the linen napkin, left the lemon twist neat on the saucer, and rested her hands, palms down, on the folio. The posture said, I am here. It also said, I am not leaving. The supervisor drew his shoulders back by a single inch. Samantha adjusted the tray cloth by a single thread. The woman in white inhaled by a single degree louder. These micro-motions, together, wrote the opening paragraph of a larger scene. The business traveler's tie found a new notch. The college kid's whisper became a sudden silence. The couple closed their photo roll. A granddaughter's grin froze mid-pixel. Danielle's thoughts moved to small kindnesses, the gate agent's farewell, a barista's half-smile earlier in the terminal when she had added $1 to the tip jar, the way a cab driver had said ma'am as if it meant neighbor. She collected these moments the way some collected souvenir spoons. Each one proved that the country could be as generous as it was complicated. The keynote in San Francisco would ask an audience to invest in tools that protect small kindnesses from large systems. It would not be the first time she had made that case. Mark cleared his throat, not rudely, merely to summon the next move. "Ma'am," he said, and now his voice carried the low hum of authority, "we'll find you a comparable seat." Danielle's answer did not move an inch. "My seat," she said, calm as a pew, "is 2A. The quiet that followed was not empty. It brimmed with witnessing. The young passenger with the short haircut slid her thumb over the camera app again, and this time let it open. She did not raise the phone. She rested it on her lap, lens peeking like a periscope. Danielle noticed and did not nod and did not look away. She allowed the moment to exist as it was, unforced, documented, true. In the aisle, the woman in winter white recalibrated her smile into something soft as cashmere. Her back glowed with the quiet shine of hand-stitched leather. Without looking at Danielle, without looking at anyone except the attendant who had approached with the discretion of a curtain, the woman lowered her voice to a private register meant to travel only as far as it needed to. She seated her purse on the cushion beside 2A as if to anchor intention. Eyes still on Samantha, the air around them perfumed with a restrained sweetness. And then she leaned just a breath closer and whispered, clear enough for the person who needed to hear, and quiet enough for those who wished not to have heard. "Handle this for me, you'll be taken care of." Samantha's smile from the aisle still lingered like a perfume note, and the tiny sentence that followed it, an elegant promise to handle this, hung in the air like something polished and heavy. The first-class cabin pressed itself back into quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that follows a dropped glass. People listened for the next sound. Danielle sat with her hands resting on the closed folio, her breath steady, her gaze soft. The linen napkin remained neatly folded. The lemon twist rested like a crescent moon on porcelain. She was not performing calmly. She was practicing it, the way one practices a hymn so it will be there when needed. The plane door was still open. The murmur from the jet bridge drifted in, a mixture of announcements and suitcase wheels, the everyday music of a major American airport. Out on the tarmac, a fuel truck idled with the patience of a large animal. Inside, the attendants moved in narrow arcs, topping off a flute here, straightening a headrest there. A man in a navy blazer finished a call and slipped his phone into his pocket as if shelving a book in the library. A grandmotherly woman tucked a paper bag into her tote, then reached for a peppermint. Life continued. It simply continued while watching. Mark arrived with the poise of a man who believed in binders. His tie sat at attention. His shoes reflected the ceiling lights in tidy ovals. He thanked the couple for their patience, nodded at the frequent flyer he recognized by face, then stopped at row 2 as if drawn by a magnet label policy. Samantha stood at his shoulder, alert and composed. The woman in winter white eased a half-step closer without seeming to move at all. The choreography found its mark. "Good afternoon, ma'am," Mark said, voice pitched to be heard by the recipient and by several witnesses. "We are going to reassign your seat for today's flight to accommodate one of our regulars who has a long-standing preference." He made the words sound final yet friendly, like a velvet rope. Danielle offered a boarding pass again, not with a flourish, but with the care one gives a document that should matter to the people who ask for it. "This is my assigned seat," she said, each syllable respectful. "I would like to keep it." She did not raise her chin, she did not lower her eyes. If dignity were a posture, it would look like this. Samantha accepted the paper and the membership card as though receiving a loaned artifact. "We appreciate your loyalty," she said lightly, the sentence shaped to be gracious while stepping around its own meaning. The card, platinum, polished by years of use, glinted once and went still. "We are simply keeping things smooth for everyone." Across the aisle, the winter white sleeve shifted, and the woman's timepiece caught the cabin lighting like a small lighthouse. "This route is always seat 2A for me," she observed to the air. "I have a standing schedule." She let the idea sit, certain that the cabin understood what a standing schedule should command. Danielle thought about schedules, how many she had kept, how many she had moved to make room for someone else's emergency. She remembered a late-night cab in Midtown, the driver passing a bottle of water back to her and calling her Mado with a respect that had nothing to do with metal cards. She remembered a barista at a small cafe near the river that morning, the way the tip jar's clink sounded like gratitude, and how she had smiled because the exchange felt human, not transactional. There were many ways to be regular in a country this large. None of them should require someone else to be irregular to make space. Mark glanced for a moment at the woman across the aisle, a quick, silent calibration of preference and expectation, then returned his focus to Danielle. "We are offering you a comparable seat. he said, shaping the word comparable as if it contained all the fairness the situation required. Your cooperation will help us depart on time. A respectful murmur passed through the row behind, the auditory equivalent of raised eyebrows. The business traveler set his glass down without drinking. The grandmotherly woman folded her hands on the peppermint and did not unwrap it. A college kid, caps peeking from a backpack pocket, pretended to study the safety card and instead listened as if taking notes for a civics class he wished existed. Danielle's reply stayed gentle. I am happy to cooperate with policies that apply to everyone, she said, and with assignments that matched the ticket I purchased. The sentence had edges and also light. Samantha's smile thinned, though she kept it in place the way one keeps a hat in a wind. It will only take a moment, she said, as if moments were trivial in all directions. We appreciate your understanding. The woman in winter white placed her designer bag on the cushion of the adjacent seat, not on Danielle's armrest. Oh no, never that, but near enough to redraw the map. We will be late, she announced to the cabin, if this continues. She checked the time again, and the glint of the watch seemed to tick louder than any secondhand. The young passenger with the close-cropped hair sat a few rows back on the aisle. She had boarded quickly, smiled at the attendant who had lifted her carry-on, and said thank you with the earnestness of someone raised to remember. Now she watched the exchange with a focus that felt like listening and like caring. Her phone rested screen down on her knee, as if the device, too, were holding its breath. Mark adjusted the angle of his shoulders until authority faced forward. Ma'am, he said to Danielle, let us make this easy. We can place you in a seat that is very similar, same cabin, same service. He gestured slightly toward a row several places back, a row that would lose a window and a measure of legroom but would keep the illusion of equivalence intact. Danielle's answer did not move. I selected this seat to work, she said. I will remain in it. The words landed without force and without apology. They simply belonged. Samantha's eyes flicked to the winter white sleeve. Mark inhaled as if to prepare for an announcement. The plane door remained open. The jet bridge returned a faint echo of a gate agent's greeting to passengers finding the roads in economy. A cart rolled outside. A service crew finished loading something labeled with a code in bold letters. The world went on with its logistics. In row 2, something more delicate than logistics was being sorted. The winter white voice acquired a softness that a microphone would call intimate. I always sit there, she repeated, still not addressing Danielle directly, as if the seat itself had failed to understand its place. It is practically mine. She looked at Samantha, then at Mark, then back at Samantha, a triangle of cues, the glance a person gives when expecting the universe to remember. Danielle thought, briefly, of the presentation slide about small failures becoming large because no one names them when they are small. She could feel the room sorting itself, who wanted to be helpful, who wanted to be done, who wanted to see what happened next. She could feel, too, the slow heat that comes when an old pattern knocks and pretends to be new. Ma'am, Mark said, lowering his voice as a measure, we are trying to prevent a disruption. The word disruption nestled itself into the air as both warning and pretext. Danielle almost smiled. So am I, she said, warmth intact. Keeping the seat as ticketed is the simplest way to do that. Samantha lifted a hand as if to smooth an invisible wrinkle in the headrest. Let us step into the galley for a moment, she suggested, the phrase an invitation shaped like a command. I prefer to remain seated, Danielle replied, her tone still civilized enough to be poured into crystal. Thank you. The stillness bent, and the entire plane felt the bend. Even the fuel truck outside seemed to idle in a lower register. The college kid's eyes widened, but he kept his posture small, as if not to jostle a moment that might break if handled roughly. The grandmotherly woman pressed the peppermint between forefinger and thumb and then set it back down. The business traveler's hand hovered over his glass and then withdrew. Every person present performed the choreography of watching while pretending not to. Mark leaned in a fraction, careful not to crowd, careful to seem careful. Either you move the easy way, he said, each word burnished to managerial shine, or we will make this more difficult. The sentence left his mouth and took a seat of its own in the cabin, cool as ice and twice as hard. The winter white sleeve relaxed an inch, as if a conclusion had been reached. Samantha's shoulders settled by the depths of a breath. Mark waited for the compliance that usually arrives after such a line, the way a train note follows a conductor's hand. Danielle did not move. She did not raise her voice. She did not offer a speech. She simply remained as present as the leather beneath her and as unassailable as a fact written clearly on a ticket. Somewhere behind them, a zipper whispered shut. Somewhere ahead, a seatbelt clicked softly as a passenger resettled to watch. The air felt like the moment before thunder when the weather has not yet decided how loud to be. A comparable seat, Mark repeated, testing whether the word might have changed meaning since last he said it. Same service. The same service, Danielle answered gently. Begins with honoring the same rules. Silence arranged itself into rows. Samantha's fingers tightened on the folded manifest, the paper making a small, papery sound like dry leaves. The winter white smile returned. Thinner now, the kind of smile people wear when an assumption meets resistance and finds itself unprepared. She checked the time again and then looked past Danielle toward the window as if the view might side with her. The young passenger a few rows back observed the delicate machinery of power and patience, of policies and preferences. She recognized that something more than a seat assignment was being decided. She had seen videos on her feed before, the ones that start with polite tone and end with a lesson no one wanted to learn in public. Her palms grew warm. She turned her phone over, screen facing up, and placed her thumb near the camera icon without pressing it. Danielle noticed the movement, the way one notices a bird landing. Present, lovely, and fragile. She neither encouraged nor discouraged it. She kept her eyes forward and her breath even. She thought of a cab driver calling her neighbor, of a barista's nod, of a gate agent's kind goodbye, of all the small American niceties that make a day easier and a life bearable. She thought of how quickly those niceties scatter when hierarchy demands a throne. The engine noises outside shifted timbre, the kind of change that means nothing to most of us and everything to the handful of people in uniform who can interpret prophecies in hum. The uniform handful did not intervene yet. The aisle remained an aisle, the row remained a row, and the decision remained a decision waiting to be made. Mark straightened until his tie aligned with duty. Last chance, he said in a tone that saved him from sounding theatrical. We need your compliance. The cabin was so quiet that a distant ice cube in a glass could be heard thinking about melting. Samantha's eyes moved between Mark and the winter white sleeve. The winter white sleeve did not move. Danielle's hands rested, steady as the horizon. And at last, because some moments require witnesses with more than memory, a young passenger took out a phone to record, whispering, "People need to see this." The hush that followed the supervisor's warning had the weight of weather. The open aircraft door breathed a faint draft from the jet bridge, a mix of coffee, wool coats, and the rubbery scent of rolling luggage. Somewhere aft, a child laughed once, and then remembered to whisper. Danielle remained seated in 2A, hands folded on the closed folio, shoulders relaxed as if anchored to something older than the cabin around her. She looked not at the winter white sleeve, not at the manifest in Samantha's hand, but at the space directly in front of her, the way a person looks when deciding to stay put kindly. A captain appeared in the aisle with the formality of an entrance queue. The silver wings above his pocket caught the light and returned it without flourish. Captain Robert Miller paused beside the supervisor, read the air the way pilots read weather, then offered a voice that had shepherded planes through worse than interpersonal disagreement. "Good afternoon," he said, as if the phrase could still bless the moment. "Our crew has the authority to reassign seats as needed for the comfort and convenience of all passengers. We ask for your cooperation." "Oh, is..." Danielle lifted her boarding pass a final time. "I understand authority," she replied, calm as church oak, "and I respect it most when it honors the rules it carries." She did not rise. She did not retreat. "This is my assigned seat." Across the aisle, the winter white smile hovered like frost, and the watch face made a small mirror of the overhead glows. Mark's tie aligned itself, a soldier awaiting orders. Samantha smoothed a non-existent wrinkle in the headrest and placed the manifest on the galley cart as though shelving doubt. The cabin listened. The plane itself seemed to listen. The captain angled his body, a hinge between policy and visual. "Ma'am," he said, bringing warmth to the syllable, "we need to keep the boarding process moving. Please gather your things and let us reseat you. We are hoping to avoid a scene." Danielle inhaled, the kind of breath that makes room for a better answer. "A scene," she said gently, "is what happens when fairness has to raise its hand to be noticed." Her fingers moved, and with the soft tact of a librarian turning a page, she slid her phone from the folio and opened the camera. The lens never rose above shoulder height. It simply blinked awake in her lap. "I want to be clear about what is happening here," she said, voice steady for the recording, not theatrical for the room. "I am being asked to leave a seat for which I hold a valid ticket so another passenger's preference can be met." The sentence restored the cabin's geometry. The truth does that. The captain's jaw tightened by a degree. Mark's glance skittered to the winter white sleeve and back. Samantha's smile held its ground like a fence in light wind. From 3 rows behind, the young passenger with close-cropped hair felt something in her sternum lift in recognition. She unlocked her phone and let her camera see what she was seeing. Careful, respectful, present. 2 security officers came down the aisle, not fast, not slow, their uniforms making an aisle within the aisle. The first officer's eyes found Danielle's face and then the boarding pass in her hand. His tone was the tone of a person sent to fix and discovering there is less to fix than to understand. "Ma'am," he said, "we have been requested to escort you off the aircraft so the crew can continue boarding." "I would like to understand the specific policy I have violated," Danielle replied. "I am seated in the place printed on my ticket. I have presented my membership card when asked. I am quiet. I am not interfering with safety or with your duties." Da, 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 da. The officers exchanged a look that translated into something like, "We were not briefed for this version." The first officer tried the next step in the script. "We appreciate your cooperation," he said. And the phrase sounded more like a hope than an instruction. Danielle let the camera in her lap keep doing its small job. "For clarity," she said, "articulate for the record. Am I being removed for refusing to surrender my assigned seat to accommodate another passenger's preference?" The question placed its own chair and sat in it. The captain stepped in, a little too ready. "You are being removed for creating a disturbance," he said. And as the word disturbance left his mouth, it seemed to look around for proof it could not find. A business traveler in a navy blazer looked down, embarrassed for the word. The grandmotherly woman pressed a peppermint between finger and thumb, but did not unwrap it. The young passenger's camera caught faces in their honesty, concern, discomfort, the quiet fury of recognition. The winter white sleeve did not tremble. Danielle's gaze held the captain's without accusation. "I am speaking softly. I am not blocking the aisle. I am asking to keep what I paid for." She let the officers see her composure the way one lets a doctor see a pulse. Persistent, real, informative. The second officer shifted his weight, exhaled, and gentled his tone. "Please gather your belongings and come with us." There was fatigue in it, the fatigue of being deployed as a tool in a task that did not fit the tool. Danielle recognized the fatigue. She also recognized the larger pattern looming over it. She closed the folio, slipped the boarding pass inside, and rose. She did it slowly, so the room could see that calm is not consent and dignity is not withdrawal. She lifted her toe by the handle and rested it against her hip. She picked up the laptop with the care a person gives a good book. No knees bent, no elbows flared. She looked at the window once, at the line of service trucks and the distant shimmer of an Illinois day, and then back to the aisle. As she turned to step out, the winter white figure leaned slightly toward Mark. The motion was subtle old habit practiced to seem like nothing at all. A folded bill moved from gloves-off fingers to the pocket behind a neat tie knot, shielded by the angle of a shoulder and the distraction of movement. "Thank you for keeping standards," the woman murmured, loud enough for nearby ears tuned to the pitch of entitlement. The sentence laid itself down like a strip of velvet over the nails of the moment. A few heads turned sharply. The young passenger's lens found the exchange and held it steady as a straight edge. Samantha's eyes flickered. Mark's color drained, then flushed, then settled into managerial blank. The captain looked away and, in looking away, testified. Danielle's own camera kept recording from the fold of her hand. She did not comment. She did not break posture. She allowed the moment to live where it had chosen to live in public, among witnesses, among people who would later recall what they had seen when someone asked them what justice looks like at the beginning. The walk down the aisle was short and long. First-class upholstery continued to be beige. Polished hardware continued to be polished. The air continued to be the exact temperature prescribed by charts. Yet every inch contained a history she had not volunteered to reenact. A passenger in row 1 straightened, then sat back, unsure where to put hands shaded by complicity and discomfort. The crew in the galley arranged cups, found the cloth too smooth that did not need smoothing, and stacked napkins that were already square. The first officer went ahead to clear the spillover in the jet bridge. The second stayed half a step behind, as though guarding something besides an exit. On the threshold between the aircraft and walkway, Danielle paused. The jet bridge hummed, hollow and utilitarian, a throat between two worlds. Far down the passage, a gate agent looked up, recognized the officers, and looked down again at the screen. Danielle glanced at the young passenger who had risen from her seat and now stood in the aisle, eyes bright, phone steady, courage small and sufficient. The young woman nodded once, the nod that says, "I see you. Keep your dignity. I have the rest." The officers did not touch Danielle. They did not need to. She walked of her own accord because that was the clearest way to show what was being asked of her and by whom. At the top of the jet bridge, away from the cabins listening, the first officer's professionalism wavered into humanity. "I am sorry, ma'am," he said. Not for the record, not for the menu, but for himself. Danielle inclined her head. "I know the feeling," she answered, and she did not mean only the apology. They reached the gate area, where the announcements sounded cheerier than necessary, and a display cycled between weather in 3 cities, and a photo of a smiling family that could be from anywhere. Danielle stepped aside so the officers would not become a wall. She opened the Notes app on her phone and spoke quietly into the microphone, documenting the timeline while it was fresh. She included the phrases used, the order of the demands, the exact moment the captain labeled her presence a disturbance, the cough of the jet bridge air, the shade of the winter white coat, the fold and transfer of the bill. She marked how still she had kept her hands and how steadily she had pitched her voice, not to prove composure, but to archive it. The first officer consulted the incident log on his tablet. His brows knit. "It says here there was disruptive behavior," he murmured, mostly to himself, but witness notes do not match. He met Danielle's eyes and held them for one unguarded beat, then nodded as if to a decision he could not make, but would remember. The young woman hurried off the plane a minute later, breath quick, phone raised. It was a passenger from row 3, the one with close-cropped hair and the careful gaze. "I followed you because I could not sit there and pretend," she said, words tumbling but clear. "I recorded everything." She turned the screen so Danielle could see the frame, the approach, the refusal, the invocation of authority, the pivot to disturbance, the soft transfer of the bill, the sentence about standards. The audio carried the hush of witnesses and the clean, unmistakable shape of a bribe. "I can send you the entire video," the young woman added. "Unedited. Thank you," Danielle said, and meant the words as a benediction. They exchanged contact information, simple as neighbors trading recipes. The young woman's hands shook for a heartbeat and then steadied. She stood taller than when she had arrived. Back at the gate desk, a supervisor in a blazer too new to be senior approached with a clipboard. "We are rebooking you," he announced, as if a fresh itinerary were a salve. "There will be meal vouchers." He tried a smile that did not belong to him yet. Danielle looked down the jet bridge, back toward the aircraft, where the winter white coat would now be settling into two-way with a glass of something pale and effervescent. She looked at the officer's tablet, at the young woman's phone, at her own recording, at the measures of truth lining up like witnesses at a town meeting. Her voice, when she answered, stayed warm. "I will wait to speak with your leadership," she said. "There is more at stake here than a seat." She moved to a quiet corner near a window that framed the runway like a long promise. Planes crossed like sentences being diagrammed by invisible chalk. The sun edged west, gilding the curve of a wingtip and the slow crawl of a catering truck. Danielle set her toe down, took out her phone again, and opened a message window addressed to the person who knew how to meet her where speed mattered and calm mattered more. Her thumbs hovered above the keyboard for the briefest pause, the kind that belongs to finality and to beginnings. Then she typed a short line, the purest distillation of what had just happened, and hit send. They chose the wrong person to humiliate. The message Danielle had sent from the gate sat in Elise Turner's phone like a flare, and the video that followed arrived from a stranger with a note that said, in careful words, that she could not sit quietly and pretend. Elise watched the first seconds on mute, Samantha's polished courtesy, Mark's managerial posture, the winter white sleeve edging the boundary of space, the captain's calm voice finding the word disturbance and trying to make it fit. Then Elise tapped for sound, and the room around her in the Chicago lounge faded, while the truth grew louder. She set the clip to upload to a secure drive, forwarded a link to console, and glanced at Danielle, who sat by the window overlooking runways, laid out like measured sentences. "The whole country is watching this," Elise said softly. Danielle nodded once, as if acknowledging a storm cloud already overhead. Passengers in the lounge did what Americans do when something catches fire on their screens. They gathered in small constellations and narrated to one another. A retired teacher with a canvas tote described the exchange to a man in a suit who had just declared that he never films in public. The man soon said that perhaps today he would start. A college student explained to a grandmother that it helps to hold the phone sideways. The grandmother answered that she had raised 3 children and had never needed orientation to tell right from wrong. A barista at the nearby counter, seeing the cluster at the corner table, slid an extra cookie across the quartz to a woman whose hands shook, then turned the tip jar so its mouth faced the crowd as if the jar itself were listening. The young witness, her name tag on social media would later reveal Maya J, posted her video with the simplest caption she could think of. A line that described exactly what the camera had seen without decoration. Within minutes, her post was shared by a local reporter whose beat included transit and fairness, then by a columnist known for essays about everyday decency, then by a retired pilot who wrote that a cockpit should be the last place to forget the difference between preference and safety. Comments collected not like leaves scattered by wind, but like signatures on a petition. Stranger by stranger, the shape of the public's attention settled into purpose. Back in the lounge, Danielle watched without rubbing at the hurt. She opened the notes file where she had already dictated a chronology and added one more observation. The way silence behaves in a room when one person is made small on purpose. Elise fielded calls with a measured calm learned from years beside a leader who expected both speed and kindness. She spoke with counsel about preserving metadata. She spoke with the communications director about language that tells the truth plainly. She answered a question from a journalist with a sentence that matters most when facts are still landing, that they would speak fully when their records were complete. In Manhattan, far above the ferry wakes sketching the river, the headquarters of Liberty Airways reflected an ordinary afternoon on its glass fade. Inside, the communications team stood in a semicircle around a wall of screens. One screen monitor mentions by the minute, another tracked follower growth and sentiment. A third showed the company's own feed, where the most recent post and advertisement featuring a family at sunset now sat beneath a growing chorus of replies that asked why a woman with a valid ticket had been told she was a disruption. A junior analyst, remembering training about escalation thresholds, pushed his chair back with more noise than he meant to make, and said that they had passed every threshold he knew. Richard Williams walked into the room without his jacket, sleeves rolled once, the look of a man who believes in messages crafted and crises contained. He asked for a summary and got it. A seat dispute in Chicago, a removal recorded by multiple passengers, a clip already moving beyond velocity into inevitability. He asked whether the clip was authentic, and the head of social said that 3 angles matched, the timeline matched, and the audio included a phrase no brand should ever have to explain in public. Thank you for keeping standards. Richard stopped moving. The screens painted his face in the blue of consequence. He told them to route any outreach from national outlets to communications, any legal questions to counsel, any operational queries to the director of Chicago station operations. Then he asked, voice flatter than he meant, whether anyone knew the passenger's name. A specialist at the nearby desk turned away from her monitor and said she did, because the launch clip included a conversation at the gate where an agent had used the name when offering a rebook. She sat it and watched the syllables land. Danielle Harris. The surname hovered for a heartbeat as if it could belong to any Danielle. She added that the young witness's longer clip included a mention of a company name in the quick exchange with Elise, and the company name was Next Gen Solutions. Corporate knowledge snapped into alignment like magnets finally free to move. Richard looked at the head of investor relations, who had entered quietly and now stood with a tablet held like a menu he did not want to read aloud. The investor relations head said that NextGen had been deep in negotiations with Liberty for a systems overhaul, and that the deal was worth a sum one states out loud with care. He also said that filings showed a strategic position taken across the last quarters of the company, give or take, when aligned with partners. Faces move through a sequence that starts with denial and ends with arithmetic. In the communications war room, a staffer read aloud a handful of comments to give the data a human spine. One from a flight attendant at another carrier who wrote that assignments are not favors. One from a pastor who wrote that he had performed too many services for people whose hearts had been broken by 1,000 small cuts. One from a woman who said she had taken her granddaughter on the first ever trip last summer, and that the child had asked why some people's manners do not extend to everyone. Another from a pilot who wrote that he, too, had a daughter, and that no one should have to record to be believed. And yet here they were. In Chicago, the station manager met with his team near the gate where the boarding had been paused. His voice low, as if speaking softly, could unwind what raised voices had done. He reminded them about policy and about discretion, then stopped reminding and started asking what had happened, really. A veteran agent stared at her shoes and said that what had happened is what often tries to happen when convenience dresses up as procedure. A newer agent said that he had never seen a camera separate a lie from a truth so efficiently. The older agent put a hand on his shoulder, the way a mentor steadies someone who has learned a lesson too early. Elise watched the view count climb the way one watches a tide swallow a low pier. She texted the communications director a phrase that had served them well in previous storms. Tell the truth, respect the audience, speak like a neighbor. The director, reading that line in the Manhattan office where coffee had gone cold, nodded as if Elise were in the room and wrote a draft that did not say error, which is too small, and did not say misunderstanding, which is too vague, and did not say inconvenience, which is an insult. He wrote a draft that named removal, that named preference, that named dignity as a non-negotiable part of service. He did not hit send. Newsrooms spun their chairs toward the story. A local affiliate interviewed a retired union rep who described the difference between discretion and discrimination. A national morning program reached out to Maya J and asked for permission to air her clip. She said yes on the condition that her full name be used only with consent. They agreed, and then she thought about her parents and about the time her mother had told her that some moments are worth the trouble of being visible. She sat with that thought and said, after a pause, that they could use her full name. In the quiet apartment on the south side, a mother looked at her daughter and called her brave. Danielle's phone began to hum, not with noise, but with the sense of a network pulling tight. Civic leaders she respected sent brief notes, seeing, here, if needed. Former classmates offered connections she might not require. A high school teacher replied to a long-ago email with a short line, saying he still believed teenagers could change the world, and also that grown women do it all the time. Danielle thanked each person with the same sincerity she had given the gate agent that morning, because thanks is a muscle and grows stronger with exercise. Back in Manhattan, the head of security operations placed a call to the Chicago captain's supervisor to request a timeline and statements. The supervisor said he would have them, but his voice did not offer certainty about when. The legal team began a document that would hold footage, transcripts, policies, and the questions a regulator would ask. Investor relations drafted a note to a handful of large holders who preferred to hear bad news in calm voices before they heard it in panicked ones. The stock's early ticks told a story no one wanted, a slope that a single meeting could steepen or soften. Richard stood very still and watched the screen where the family at Sunset ad sat beneath the replies that had turned it into a billboard for something else. He thought about the word brand and how often it is used like a perfume to mask the human scents companies carry. He thought about the first time he had flown as a boy, the way a stewardess had handed him a set of plastic wings and called him captain, and how large that had made him feel. He wondered what it cost a company to make a woman feel small in public, and he had a sense, for the first time that day, that the cost might be the company. A member of the PR team stepped into the doorway and said that a cable network had just moved the story into the top slot for the next hour, and that a well-known civil rights attorney had commented to her following that the video spoke for itself. The room grew quieter, which is what rooms do when they decide to listen to consequences before speaking again. Richard asked whether counsel had reviewed the draft statement. Counsel said that the draft was accurate, but that a statement without action would be a match near dry grass. The communications director lifted his head. We need a board, he said, meaning not just signatures on a press release, but decisions that press releases cannot make. We need operations and the HR and flight ops in the same room. We need to call the chair of the safety committee. We need to call the head of training. We need to call legal and investor relations and the union liaison. We need to call the board. In Chicago, people in the lounge heard the gate announcement that the flight would be delayed for a short while and then for a while longer. Some lifted their cups and turned back to their conversations. Others angled their bodies toward televisions mounted on the wall where the news without sound scrolled captions. A child pressed both hands against the glass to count how many planes she could see, then announced a number in words her father repeated as though confirming a forecast. A man in a denim jacket called his wife to say he would be later than planned and asked her to put the roast in at a lower temperature. The country keeps moving, because that is what countries do, even when they are also watching themselves. Elise's phone lit again. A message from a reporter she respected, asking whether Danielle would like to provide comment beyond the statement. Elise looked at Danielle, who was reading the line about a scene being what happens when fairness has to raise its hand. Danielle said that she would speak when she could speak fully, and that for now the record they were building mattered more than the quote. She asked Elise to check on the young witness, to make sure that kindness reached her through the noise. Elise sent a note, and when Maya replied with a string of very human sentences about nerves and family and dinner plans now postponed, Elise told her that doing the right thing often rearranges a day. Richard pressed his fingertips to his temple, not out of theatrical distress, but to ground himself in the fact that his choices would climb a ladder inside other people's lives. He pictured a training room, full of attendants and agents who had learned to smile through discomfort, and thought about what it would mean to say to them that smiling is not a shield against complicity. He pictured pilots reminded that authority is real and must be tethered to fairness, or it turns into something else in a hurry. He pictured the script rewritten so that the word preference appears only in the context of coffee, not in the context of rights. The head of HR appeared with a list of names from Chicago and with a policy binder marked as current. The binder looked heavy, and for the first time that day, Richard considered that heaviness might not be a sign of thoroughness but of inertia. He looked past the screens to the windows where Manhattan made its steady arguments about ambition. He looked back at the screens where the country made its steady arguments about decency. The distance between those windows and these screens felt smaller than it had that morning. Across an ocean of retweets, a message from a major advocacy organization arrived in the company inbox. A request for a meeting and a set of questions about training, about complaint mechanisms, about protection for employees who speak up when they see a colleague choosing convenience over equity. The head of compliance said they would answer. The head of training said they would design. The head of operations said they would schedule. Investor relations said the market would not wait. In the lounge, Danielle's glass of water had gone warm. She set it aside and asked Elise to loop in outside counsel, whose counsel was mostly moral clarity. Elise nodded, already composing the outreach in a tone that said partnership rather than panic. The sky beyond the window changed color by a register or two, a reminder that even the sun moves with or without permissions. Richard reached for a pen, realized it was not the tool he needed, and set it back down harder than he meant, the tab loud in a room newly allergic to noise that sounded like denial. He exhaled, squared his shoulders, and did the one thing a leader can still do when the facts would not be moved and the cameras would not look away. He said the sentence aloud so everyone in the room would hear it exactly as he meant it, and so the room would remember who had said it first. Call an emergency board meeting. Now. The elevators opened onto a corridor of hush and glass, and the boardroom at Liberty Airways waited with the stillness of a stage before a curtain lift. Manhattan pressed against the windows in winter gray, the Hudson penciled in the distance, the city's energy dimmed to a respectful murmur by double panes and carpet thick enough to swallow footsteps. Inside, directors sat in a long arc, counsel clustered at the flanks with yellow pads open, investor relations tucked near the back with tablets awake, and a screen at the far end frozen on a paused frame from a clip the country had begun to memorize. The emergency summons from the previous hour thrummed in the air like a struck tuning fork. Assistants had laid water in tumblers with coasters precisely aligned, and a tray of coffee cooled untouched. The door opened, and Danielle entered with Elise 2 steps to her left. She carried no entourage beyond what the moment required. A folder with records, a phone with time-stamped notes, and a composure honed by years of rooms that mistake patience for permission. Heads rose. Conversations trailed off mid-syllable. Richard Williams stood, the habit of courtesy still automatic, and gestured to a seat as if he could see the weather itself. For a breath's length, no one spoke. The screens paused image row 2 of a first-class cabin. A woman in winter white angled toward the aisle. An attendant mid-sentence seemed to watch the board as much as they watched it. Counsel cleared a throat. Someone at the far end of the table adjusted a cufflink. The HVAC's exhale offered the room a steady baseline on which to arrange what would be said next. Richard began with a careful sentence he had used in smaller fires. Miss Harris, we deeply apologize. Danielle lifted a hand, polite and sufficient to pause a CEO without making a spectacle of the pause. It was not unkindness, it was punctuation. I am not here for apologies, she said. Voice in the register a radio host uses when inviting the country to lean closer. I am here for clarity, for accountability, and for decisions that match the facts. The facts, on screen, moved. An assistant dimmed the lights, someone tapped a key, the room watched the clip in its full length, the way one listens to a witness whose memory has already been tested in public. Samantha's polished approach, Mark's managerial certainty, the captain's use of a word that did not fit the reality it tried to name, the stillness of a woman who asked only to keep what she had paid for, the soft transfer of a folded bill and the sentence that called the exchange standards, the escort to the jet bridge that did not touch her because it did not need to, the click at the end when the young witness stopped recording not because the moment had ended but because she had decided to become visible. When the screen returned to stillness and the lights rose, the room held its breath another beat. The director, who had once flown regional routes decades ago, looked at his hands as if the lines in his palm might spell out a better training plan. Counsel reached for a pen and then did not write, as though waiting for the action item the pen deserved. Elise placed a slim packet on the table in front of Richard, a chronology compiled since the Chicago Gate, a list of witnesses who had already offered to provide statements, a preservation letter ready to send, and a short assessment from outside counsel whose judgment tended to remove the fog from decision-making. Danielle added a second packet that did not belong to communications or to PR, a set of filings that documented a position quietly accumulated across recent quarters, a position large enough to light up any cap table, and a letter of intent between Liberty and Next Gen Solutions that had been until the cabin in Chicago a few calendar days from signature. As of the current quarter, Danielle said, not for drama, but for record, I hold, together with strategic partners, approximately a quarter of Liberty Airways. I am also the chief executive of Next Gen Solutions. We were about to sign a contract for systems modernization worth $50 million. The decision whether that contract proceeds is not separate from the decision you will make today about who you are. The sentence did not land like a threat. It landed like architecture. The board could feel where walls should go and where doors must open. Investor relations inhaled in the precise way of a person who knows how fast markets translate morality into price. A director notorious for disliking surprises sat back, fingers steepled, calculating the degrees by which culture, not just optics, would need to move. Richard's mouth opened, closed, then found the line a leader uses when grasping for a small landing strip in a storm. We will address this with swift corrective action, he said. We will take responsibility. Danielle's answer came without ornament. Responsibility begins with accuracy. It continues with consequences. It ends with a change you can measure. The screen flicked to a slide Elise had prepared on the flight up. Not branding, not spin, but 3 columns labeled what happened, why it is unacceptable, what must change. In the first column, removal of a passenger with a valid boarding pass to satisfy another's preference, acceptance of cash, a misuse of the word disturbance. In the second, dignity treated as discretionary, policy used as pretext, training that taught procedure but not principle. In the third, immediate termination of those who chose convenience over equity, full grounding of operations for 2 days for mandatory training developed by a firm that understands both bias and operations, an independent channel for employees to report misconduct without retaliation, public transparency on metrics that matter, including demographic parity in service outcomes. Elise did not read the slide aloud. The board could read. What she offered verbally was a sentence about sequence. You will be judged by the order in which you do these things, she said, not simply by whether you do them. Counsel raised the concern counsel must raise. Union agreements, due process, the need to respect processes, even when the impulse is to swing. Danielle nodded, unsurprised. Then move fast within those processes, she said. Suspend today. Investigate with a speed that signals seriousness. Conclude and terminate where justified. Announce a plan built on principle, not on optics. A director known for caution asked whether NextGen would still consider the modernization work. Danielle met his eyes, not harshly. I will not place our technology where your culture will break it, she said. Fix the culture, then we will talk. Across the table, an older director who had grown up in a small town where a general store sat at the heart of civic life spoke for the first time. When the storekeeper humiliates a customer in front of neighbors, he said in a voice that still carries country roads, the storekeeper does not get to decide whether the neighbors tell the story. He only gets to decide whether to change how he runs his store. No one replied. They did not need to. The room had been given a metaphor it could handle. Richard looked like a man catching up to the truth while standing. He asked operations if grounding every plane for 2 days was operationally feasible. Operations said yes with a cost they could calculate, and also that not grounding would cost something they could not survive. HR confirmed that suspensions could be issued before sunset if they began now. Training said they could begin by morning if they called in partners who had built curricula that changed behavior rather than check boxes. Compliance whispered that regulators would call. Counsel said that regulators should be called first. Investor relations, watching a graph he did not show the room, lifted his chain in the smallest plea for speed. Danielle placed the last piece on the table, the one the moment required and that she had not wanted to use. There's another decision, she said quietly, and the quiet deepened. If you do not act decisively, if you seek half measures or cosmetic reform, I will withdraw the contract, I will unwind the position, I will speak publicly about why. It did not sound like an ultimatum. It sounded like a contingency plan for integrity. Fire everyone involved and reform your system. Or I will walk away and so will the investors. The sentence hung with more gravity than volume, and in its wake came the smallest sound, the scratch of a fountain pen as the board secretary wrote the words that would, by sundown, become minutes and, by morning, become the spine of an announcement. A director asked, almost softly, about the witness who had recorded. Elise said that Maya Johnson had acted with courage and should be protected rather than punished. HR nodded, already sketching a memo to every station with a line about safeguarding passengers who document potential misconduct. Compliance suggested the creation of a formal guideline that makes clear that recording, when it does not interfere with safety, is not a disturbance. The captain on the safety committee, who had remained quiet out of embarrassment for his profession, lifted his eyes and said they would write that guidance tonight. Near the back, a young aide slipped through the door, breathless from a jog down the hall he had not planned to take. He held a tablet flat like a tray and waited until Richard glanced his way. When he had the room's permission, the aide stepped forward, the alarm held in check by respect for the moment's severity. He lowered his voice because bad news prefers the register of understatement, but urgency sharpened every word. Stock is down 12% and falling fast. By late afternoon, the board's vote had traveled through the building like a quiet bell. Notices were drafted, reviewed by counsel, and delivered with care. In Chicago, a station manager read from a prepared script that did not hide behind euphemism. Suspensions effective immediately pending investigation. Cooperation required. Dignity non-negotiable. In New York, Richard recorded the message to employees in a voice steadier than his heartbeat, and operations issued the instruction that would ripple across gates from Newark to Oakland. Every plane would stand still for 48 hours while the company learned to move differently. Screens at airports changed from departure times to training schedules, and an internal portal lit up with modules designed by people who had measured bias not as a slogan but as a set of behaviors that could be unlearned. At the same time, a different message left Danielle's desk short, neighborly in tone, addressed to the young witness who had become brave in public. It thanked Maya Johnson for choosing visibility over comfort and included a number for an advocate who could answer questions about press, safety, and patience. Danielle's note did not praise heroism. It praised steadiness. Maya replied with words that read like relief and then asked whether she had done the right thing. Danielle wrote back, yes, and added that right things often feel lonelier in the first hour than in the sixth. Richard's second call of the evening went to the head of training at Liberty's Union. Because any reform that bypasses labor arrives as an insult, he explained the planned grounding coursework, facilitated sessions where attendants, agents, and pilots would practice scenarios until reflexes shifted from convenience to fairness. The union head, tired and weary, said that members were bruised by the public glare, but many were also ashamed. He agreed that saying sorry without learning would be a sin against the job. They set the first sessions for morning, and a retired captain with the teacher's patience agreed to open with a reminder that authority earns trust only when it restrains itself. Night gathered and spread. In lounges where travelers waited for rebooks, baristas learned to make decaf for people whose nerves already raced. A grandmother told a child that sometimes you do not get where you are going on the day you planned, and that this, too, is part of being human together. A gate agent taped a handwritten sign that said, "Thank you for your grace," and someone added a smaller note beneath it that said, "We are learning." Danielle and Elise reviewed the final draft of the public statement. It named removal, named preference, named a transfer of cash, named the word disturbance as a misuse. It did not use the phrasing of spin. It used the phrasing of neighbors. It committed to publish metrics the following quarter. Complaints resolved, training completed, discipline issued, satisfaction scores by route and cabin, all broken down in ways that would show whether courtesy had become less selective. Danielle asked for one more sentence. Plain as sunlight. Kindness is policy, not a perk. Elise typed it and left it there, unadorned. By morning, the quiet spectacle of grounded planes had become its own sermon. On runways from Boston to Phoenix, aircraft sat in patient rows while inside hangars and conference rooms. People talked about what dignity looks like at row 2 and row 37 and at the gate when the traveler is tired and late. In one room, an attendant admitted she had smiled through moments that deserved a pause and a question, not a smile. In another, a captain said he had once been trained to intervene only for safety and was now learning that fairness is also a kind of safety. In a third, a young agent confessed that the hardest part had not been telling the difficult customer no, it had been telling a coworker no when the coworker was older and certain. The facilitator, a steady man with a soft voice, said that courage often sounds like politeness with a spine. While this happened, Danielle met with a small team in the borrowed office overlooking the Hudson. The skyline wore a hard winter light. She introduced the program she had promised in the boardroom, the one with a name chosen for its lack of glamour, Second Path. It would be open to employees who had caused harm and wanted to return to the work with different hands and eyes. Participation would not erase accountability. It would deepen it. A social worker described the curriculum: listening without defensiveness, practicing apologies that do not center the apologizer, rehearsing moments where an old reflex might twitch and learning a new one instead. Elise explained how mentors will be assigned, how progress will be measured, how completion will be public without being performative. Richard agreed that the company would pay for it, and HR agreed that managers would not treat it as a loophole. Journalists asked whether this was leniency dressed as reform. Danielle answered that punishment alone is too cheap for the damage done and too expensive for the culture you hope to save. A columnist wrote that she sounded like someone who had learned the cost of both vengeance and denial. A morning show host, after a segment that did not shout, said into the camera that her mother had taught her to say, "I am sorry," and then show it with your hands. Weeks turned, and then months did what months do. The grounded hours ended. The first flights launched with crews who had practiced new sentences aloud. A family boarded in Cleveland and found that an attendant knelt to speak to a child at eye level, because dignity is easier to hear from there. A man in Denver asked to change seats for a preference and was told no with a kindness that left him no room to argue. A frequent flyer in Dallas tipped and then wrote a note on the comment card that the smile he received felt less like a mask and more like a welcome. The complaint line had fewer calls that used the word humiliation. The training rooms had more callbacks to examples that began with, "I saw my colleague start to bend the rule, and I remember the module where we hold one another up." The people at the center of the original moment lived their consequences. Samantha met with investigators, faced a record from 3 angles, signed a form with shaking hands, and read the letter that ended her employment. Mark did the same without the shaking hands. Captain Miller received notice of termination for cause, and for cause alone. Rebecca learned that elite status does not survive daylight. The lounge that once felt like a private club became a room where eyes did not glance away. She discovered how small a hallway can feel when everyone else in it has seen a 10-second clip of your worst assumption dressed in wool. And still the world kept moving, reshaped by the weight of what it had learned. Maya completed her semester and returned to her part-time job at a campus cafe, where she refused a free coffee until the barista winked and said, "This one is not a bribe, it is gratitude." The officers who had walked Danielle to the jet bridge were invited to speak at a training about procedure and conscience, and one of them told a room that he had said, "I am sorry" to a stranger, and had meant it in a way that changed how he wore the badge. The retired captain opened each session by reminding new pilots that a cockpit is a place where power must be leashed to judgment, or it will bite. By the 6th month, numbers became sentences. Complaint volume fell. Employee satisfaction rose. A quarterly report showed that in the cabin where the story began, service scores for passengers of color and for passengers who required assistance had closed gaps that no one had admitted were there. Investor calls felt less like interrogations and more like conversations. Richard learned to say, "I do not know yet," and to say it without fear. He also learned to walk into training rooms and sit in the back row without being announced, and to leave by shaking one hand in the hallway as if he worked there too. A journalist stopped Danielle outside the meeting at NextGen's offices in the meatpacking district and asked whether the change would last. Danielle said that permanence is the wrong word for culture. Cultures are gardens, and gardens need tending. She said the company would be judged not by the season's bloom but by whether it pulled the weeds when everyone's attention drifted. The journalist nodded and then asked, perhaps too gently, what the story meant for the country at large. Danielle paused long enough to earn the right to answer and then gave the line that would be replayed on evening broadcasts and quoted in homilies and stapled to corkboards in break rooms that still smelled faintly of coffee and cleaner. It means justice can fly higher than prejudice. The reporter lowered the microphone with a look that resembled gratitude. Elise touched Danielle's elbow to guide her toward the waiting car. A late afternoon sun laid a soft gilding on the river and on the glass of the buildings that watched it. At San Francisco International, where this would always feel like a story's next chapter, a crew finished their checks, a gate agent smiled with eyes and with voice, and a child pressed a hand to a window to trace the edge of a wing. The plane lifted over the San Francisco sky, the sunset staining the horizon a deep red, leaving an echo behind for whoever cared to listen. The story closes not with the roar of engines or the clatter of headlines, but with the quiet certainty that dignity, once defended, can reshape even the coldest of rooms. We watched a woman stripped of her rightful seat rise with calm resolve. In that grace, the balance of power shifted until truth itself filled the cabin. At its heart, this tale reminds us that prejudice, whether dressed as policy or preference, cannot stand when confronted by steady courage and the insistence that every voice matters. It is a reminder older than the airlines and as close as our own porches. Like a lantern left glowing on the darkened stoop, a single act of fairness can light the way for many who follow. So tonight, as you sit with your memories and your own long journeys, let this story be an invitation to carry a little more kindness into the places where it has too often been absent. And if it touched you, consider passing its warmth along, for in the sharing, justice continues its flight.